I gotta say this to my white friends. Don't ever be afraid for somebody to call you racist. If it's racist for you to support a president that makes sure we have the lowest black unemployment, to make sure black babies ain't being killed, to make sure there's money invested in our community, well, tell them you're the best racist ever. I mean, and somebody, please do me a favor. Can somebody tell Donald Trump how to be a racist? Because he's not doing a good job.
Yo, Black Lives Matter! Actually, all lives matter. That's racist. Black Lives Matter!
1 day later.
That's racist. All lives matter!
There's $24 billion here and there, $500 million there. Some people want to be paid back, and members of the public are wondering, why are we suffering when you have all of this vast wealth? Those are legitimate concerns.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa. And when...
Ooh, that was an... Okay.
You study today's black culture is trash. Ain't nothing positive about black culture. We're not highlighting spelling bee winners. We don't talk about the newest black business that's doing good. When you go on social media, you look at some of the most trending videos and trending topics. It ain't black empowerment. It ain't uplifting black people. When you look at our movies, we ain't got no black heroes. Black culture has black propaganda. Hitler used propaganda to get the Germans to turn on the Jews. We use propaganda for our culture. We propagate pimps, gangsters, killers, womanizers, robbers, deceit, being unfaithful. We got some propaganda, homie, that's brainwashing.
I am a pastor. I'm a man of faith. I have a profound reverence for life. Well, I want to save your life.
I have to respond to this very quick because he told me Black Lives Matter. And if you think about it, Senator, in Atlanta, Georgia, there's more black baby that is aborted than anything. So if Black Lives Matter, why are you not protecting those babies? And instead of aborting those babies, why are you not baptizing those babies?
The Woman King is a modern-day version of D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. The 1915 silent film was used to promote racism through its false narratives. The Woman King does the same thing. It lies and misappropriates history, leaving the viewer into thinking that the Dahomey tribe eradicated slavery from within their ranks. They did not. Instead, they continued on with impunity. Yet, people still make excuses. Some people refuse to put any blame whatsoever on Africa for their huge part in the slave trade. Now, why is that? Black Lives Matter! Oh, did you see the new Candace Owens film on BLM? Nah, man, you a sellout. Oh, you mean BLM raising nearly $80 million, but almost zero money going to the black community? Building several lavish multi-million-dollar properties in affluent all-white neighborhoods and investing $13 million in Wall Street? You mean that kind of a sellout? Oh, man, Black Lives Matter! Despite Root's claim that during the heyday of the massive slave trade from West Africa to America, a white man was more likely to develop malaria in Africa than catch slaves. The average life expectancy of a white male in sub-Saharan Africa's interior at the time was less than a year. Men from Europe or the Western Hemisphere arrived on Africa's coast, bought slaves, and fled as quickly as they could. For the slave trade to be possible, they needed massive help from Africans. Because we do not want to be numbers, we will defend the value of the human being. Every single human being, because each of us has a unique genetic code that is unrepeatable. And like it or not, that is sacred. We will defend it. We will defend God, country, and family. For those things that disgust people so much, we will do it to defend our freedom. Because we will never be slaves and simple consumers at the mercy of financial speculators.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not too long ago, two friends of mine were talking to a Cuban refugee, a businessman who had escaped from Castro. And in the midst of his story, one of my friends turned to the other and said, "We don't know how lucky we are." And the Cuban stopped and said, "How lucky you are. I had some place to escape to." And in that sentence, he told us the entire story. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
This is what Reagan later meant by "we are a shining city on a hill." Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle, and welcome to the That Live Friday Night Show. And typically, we have Kira Bowlby on with us tonight. We are going to be with me because some things have changed around, scheduling happened, but the topic was going to be about Judeo-Christian culture and whether or not it is imperative to Western civilization and the success of America in particular. And so what we're going to do today is, since it's just going to be me, is I'm going to check out the comments and make sure there's nothing going on. If there's some activity going on there, I'll stop and address the comments. I may not be able to get to all of them as they're coming up, but I will get to them eventually at the end of no other time in the show. I'll do it then. But today, what I want to do is I want to go through a story and tell you guys something, because it's something that's really important in society, where your history is being hidden and avoided. And right now, our history in America has been totally hidden and avoided. And the reasons for that are many. And we can get into that all you want, and we will at some point in the future. But I think today, as you can see, the title of this particular live stream is going to be on the Pilgrims. And it's something that I hadn't really thought about much growing up. The Pilgrims, you see that on Charlie Brown. You see the Pilgrims in the fudgy-dudgy hats and the big buckles and the turkey guns. And they, come to America, fuddle the way through and can't plant corn and then have Thanksgiving. And then after that Thanksgiving, that's all you pretty much know about the Pilgrims. The thing about that is that the Pilgrims and what they had to do to come to the New World, America, is something that lays the foundation for freedom across this world. 400 years ago, these Pilgrims, what they did and what they were able to accomplish through the strength of their will and their devotion to their God, to the devotion to their families, to the devotion of freedom and liberty, they are the ones that put forth the foundation of what we have here in America. And what we're seeing now in society is we're seeing people like the 1619 Project. Okay, this is a revisionist, Pulitzer Prize winning series of documents or essays that was done to explain why white people are racist and why everything white people ever do is racist, and how the year 1619 is the year that they claim that was the beginning of the slave emphasis here in America, in which white Europeans suppressed Africans and made sure that they were continually be oppressed and grew their wealth off the backs of Black Africans here in America. And actually, nothing can be further from the truth. And so one thing I'm going to do here in this particular live stream is I'm going to go through a talk that I've been giving for the past 2 or 3 months. And it's through the biblical citizenship in modern America, through the Patriot Academy. And who these guys are a group of people who, led by a guy named Jeff Green, who takes the patriots of the past and puts it into a classroom form and presents it in a way where the average person on the street can learn about the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers, and not only that, the various motives that these people had to build this country. And one of the classes that they offer is Biblical Citizenship in Modern America. And I've taken this class twice, actually 3 times technically. I've offered it as a virtual class. I'm going to offer it again as a virtual class. And so what this does is it brings you through the framework to understand, without a shadow of a doubt, that this country, America, was founded on the principles of the Bible, and even going further than that, an evangelical purpose to push forth Christianity and spread Christianity throughout the world. At its core foundation, even before 1776 or anything that happened with our current founding fathers, because those founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, George Washington, Benjamin Rush, James Madison, all these guys, their founding fathers were the Pilgrims. And they looked to the Pilgrims and what they did in their lives to come from Holland, actually from England to Holland to America. And the story I'm about to tell you is absolutely insane. If you hadn't heard the story, I look forward to telling it to you. And so I'm going to jump right in here. I have some presentations here. I'm going to go through a deck of screenshots here that I've done, I built, and I'm going to share with you at the end of it. I'm going to share with you the recipe sauce for actually getting this country back to where it needs to go, where it needs to be, back to the foundations, because the Pilgrims left us something for us to use and study so we can get back to where we are or we need to be in terms of bringing liberty and independence back to this country in a world now where everything is revisionism, where everything now is about, what class you're with, what skin color you have, what something you have that has nothing to do with you being an American. And that is not what this country was founded on, because we're founded as equals under the eyes of God. So let's just jump right here. It's going to take some time to get it all through. But if you have any questions, I will jump in the comments and see what's going on there. I will star them if I can't get to them, and I'll answer them at the very end, if nowhere else. Okay, so let's just get started here. Let me jump over here. I'm going to bring up this particular document here, and we're going to start our story here with a guy by the name of William Tyndale. William Tyndale was a gentleman who died at age 42. He died at age 42 because he was murdered, or he was killed because he translated the Bible into English. Why is that a problem? Well, the problem with that is because at the time in England, the Bible was written in Latin, and it was controlled by the church and by the monarchy or the king or the queen. And they controlled that because they wanted to make sure that they had the people in line. And so by keeping the Bible outside of the people's language, people didn't know. They were dumb. They didn't understand what was going on, so they just followed whatever the church said. Well, guess what happened? Once some English language Bibles started sneaking into England, all of a sudden, guess what? People start reading the Bible for themselves. People start to have Bible studies for themselves and said, you know what? Hey, this isn't what the king said. This isn't what or our pastor or clergy said. Not at all. And what was happening was they were understanding that what they were learning was not true. And it became a problem with the higher ups that if they continued to have people reading the Bible for themselves, their power would be no more. And so in doing so, Tyndale was actually, I think he was burned at the stake for doing that. And later on, more English Bibles were coming into England, into the peoples, and then they became a huge problem. And with that was when this Bible was translated in 1535. He was killed 1 year later after that for doing that. But then you had a person by the name of Queen Elizabeth, and then she also was not looking. She was not in favor of this. And so when she was coming up, she left office, and then she was basically put forth something called the Act Against the Puritans of 1593, making it a crime to have an English version of the Bible, to prescribe to this, because again, it was undermining the power of the people, of power of the monarchy and the church. Those two were lockstep. So if you disassociate yourself from the clergy, you automatically were disassociating yourself from the monarchy, which was actually treason, punishable by death. And so this guy here, this is King James. King James was a tyrant. King James claimed to be a Christian, but King James had his philosophy of the right for the divine right of kings, which meant he felt, and he actually coined this phrase, saying that the king or the queen, in his case was king, had the divine right to rule, and whatever he said God was saying. So he was speaking for the king. This guy here was a horrible leader. He bankrupted the country, and even though he claimed to be a Christian, he ended up persecuting the people who were the most devout people of the Bible, and that were what they called Puritans. And these people, the Puritans, were people who were saying, "Look, we had our Bible study last night, and guess what? You know, the Bible says that Christ is the head of the church, not the king, not our pastor. It's Christ." And certain things were starkly different than what they were being told. And so these Puritans say, you know what? We need to purify the church and say, hey, we can no longer have a situation where the king tells us. Let me move myself in frame here so you can see me a little better, because I'm out of frame. Let me do that real quickly. There we go. All right. And so they're saying, look, that's not cool. So, all right, so the king has this, but the Bible says this, so that's a problem. So they say, if we can't purify the church, then we're going to leave the church, and that was called separatists, and they became called the separatists, and those separatists were the subsect of the Puritans, which were now your Pilgrims. All right, so let's go forward a little bit here, and let's talk about this a little bit. So the Pilgrims now emerged. Okay, so there was a book called The Act of Uniformity, which required every citizen to attend church regardless of their personal beliefs, or face a stiff penalty. The Common Book of Prayer was the only approved church liturgy, and any worship services conducted apart from that were illegal. This reminds me a little bit of King Nebuchadnezzar, right? If you read the book of Daniel, you say, hey, hold on, excuse me, time out. Don't you, we don't need to pray to this God, do we? We don't have to eat the king's food, do we? Because we're Jews. We want to eat the food that God tells us to eat. And so I'm sure the people who were in the Church of England, who were reading their books in English in their Bible studies, were saying, hey, yeah, this isn't right. And so that was causing some serious problems. And so the proliferation of more English Bibles in the church, or sorry, in the home studies, led to more divisions in the church. And so these people, again, were called Puritans, but the people that that came away from that were called the separatists, and they ultimately were considered to be the Pilgrims. So, okay, so you have all this turmoil going on. So from 1593 to 1603, so there were some serious problems going on. There was a law out there that was saying, look, you know what? If you are doing this, you are now a fugitive of the state, and you can be arrested, you can be killed. And so what the church wanted to do at that point was they wanted to separate and go to the outskirts, and they went to an town called Scrooby, England. And I think I have something more here on that. I'll get to that in a second here. But Scrooby, England is in the outset, in the middle of England, and they were there in a remote area so that they could worship God in secret. And worshiping him in secret was beneficial because they weren't, susceptible to being, tortured or killed, but they had to do it carefully. And they were able to get together with, I'll get to that in a second here, a guy by the name of Richard Clifton, who was actually a pastor. And he got connected with a gentleman by the name of William Brewster, who became the head of the Pilgrims, one of the leaders of the Pilgrims. He was on the Mayflower going later. And so eventually, Richard Clifton was a pastor at this church here, All Saints Church. And he had a good following, and he was part of what they called the separatists at the time. But he was actually kicked out of that parish. And then William Brewster, another gentleman who lived right next to Scrooby, brought him into his house, and he preached to a growing number of people who will one day become known as the Pilgrims. So essentially, you had the sect going out into this middle of England called Scrooby. This pastor named Richard Clifton met up with this gentleman by William Brewster. They got together, they started their little church, and this particular church met for many, many years, I think 6 years, and they met in secret. And in doing so, it was just something that was just really, really, really powerful. And so, but what ended up happening was they found out that they were getting to the point now where they actually had to do something else, because the pressure was coming on so tough and so strong that the people in Scrooby, the small church in Scrooby, they made a decision. Look, we're going to do one of two things. We're either going to stay here and get caught, or we're going to leave. So they had a plan to actually escape Scrooby, England, and go over to Holland. At the time, Holland was one of the few areas in the entire Europe, probably the only place in Europe where people could actually worship freely. If they had gone to Germany, literally millions of people were dying in Germany. If they had gone to France, thousands were dying there. Scotland, people were being killed there as well, including pastors. So really, there was no other place to go for these people other than Holland. So they decided to, okay, let's hire us a Dutch captain. And this Dutch captain is going to be someone who's going to help us secretly leave England, go to Holland, and then from there, we're going to set up shop and we're going to train in Holland, and then we're going to come back to England and free our people. That was the plan. Well, the problem with that is that this Dutch captain who was going to help them, he was going to have a ship. They were going to go at night and meet this captain, and they were going to get on the ship and go to Holland. The problem was this captain was actually double dipping with the bad guys. So he actually was in cahoots with the police or the monarchy or the authorities for that matter in England to say, hey, these guys are going to escape. I'll give them up to you. What do I get out of it? They said, you can get everything they have, their money, whatever they're carrying, you can carry that. You can have that. The problem is that the Pilgrims actually sold everything they had. Now, the women had some possessions hidden in their skirts, but there wasn't much, like pots and pans and stuff like that. But nevertheless, these guys went for 60 miles overland in September. So they go to this place only to find out that the captain betrayed them. They get locked up, they get put in prison, and that's the end of their particular escape, or so they thought. What ended up happening was, as they're in jail, you would think most people would say, you know what, we gave it a good try. It didn't work out. No big deal. We'll just go back to England and we'll just suck it up. No, they actually were excited because they thought that God was training them in their way that they could actually become stronger to do God's will. These people were pot committed. Okay. These people were 100% all in. They didn't care because they felt that by reading the word of God in their own language, they were hearing from God directly, and that was more important than life itself. And they were willing to give it up all, their money, their families, their children, their lives, for doing God's will, because for the first time in their lives had they heard the word of God in their language. So they were freed at some point after that in prison. And instead of, packing it in and giving up like some of us would do today, they said, you know what, we are going to try again. So they got another Dutch captain. And this captain was actually a genuine captain. But instead of having them all go at one time together, they sent the women and children ahead of themselves. And they sent them down on a raft, downriver, and they were going to meet up with them at some point in time and reconnect. Well, in this case, the women actually got there a day early to this particular rendezvous point. The problem was the raft was stuck in the mud because the women were getting seasick. So they ferried the raft over to the shore where it was more calm, but the calm waters was also shallow, and they got stuck in a mud bank, and they were dead to rights. And so guess what happened? The authorities found out about it. They saw the women and the children on this raft, helpless. And by the way, the women and children were the ones that had all of the money. They had all the possessions. So the men were separate, hoping to reconnect. They never did, at least not then. What ended up happening was absolutely incredible. So what happened next is, as they were coming, I got a map here, so let's show you. So in the center here, we have this United Kingdom. So Skirby's right there in the center. And so the first thing they did was they actually came to this point here. So the first thing was coming to this particular location. And then they ended up getting to the shore, and then that's where they met their Dutch captain, the second Dutch captain. And then from that point on, they were actually having to leave because the captain of the ship said, you know what, guys, you hired me to this, but if I get caught, I'm going to lose my ship. So he cried out an oath, sacramente, took off with the men, leaving the women behind on that mud bank to be arrested and put into prison, which they were. And so they got into this ship and left. At that moment, a 2-week storm of horrendous proportions came up, took the ship, carried it off up towards Norway. And if you look at Amsterdam, is south. It's going the wrong way. And so for 2 weeks, William Bradford wrote in his journal that there were days on days they couldn't see the sun. They couldn't go to the deck because it was too dangerous. They could wash overboard. So it was a horrible time, and they were worried about their families and this and that. But yet they were carried off. And the ship captain said, "Look, guys, you know what? This is going to be it. You guys, this is it. We're going to die. So say your prayers. We're done. We're done for." And at that point in time, the people on that ship prayed to God with faith, saying, "Look, God, even now, you can still free us. You can still make this happen. We trust in you. We're in for you." And they prayed fervently to the Lord. And at that point in time, the storm abated. Now, if you guys saw Forrest Gump, it's a movie in there. I'll give a quick spoiler here, but there's a point in the movie in Forrest Gump where Tom Hanks' character Forrest was with his buddy Bubba. They were a partnership for a company trying to do shrimping, and they were not doing very well with shrimp at all. So they went out to sea one time, and a storm hit, hurricane came in and took out all the competition. And then they were able to actually, because they were at sea, were able to actually survive because the ship, was survived. There's only shrimping ship in the region, and they were able to flourish. What happened here is over 100 ships sank during that 2-week storm. And the only one that survived was that ship with the Pilgrims on it. And at that point in time, they ferried themselves back to Holland. That's where they prayed right there. They went back to Holland, and that's where they stayed. And they were got under the tutorship of a guy by the name of John Robinson. He was the guy who was going to teach these Pilgrims how to grow in their faith and how to go back to England potentially and actually free their people, because that was their goal. Their goal was to learn and come back and free their families back in England. Well, when they were in England, when they were in Amsterdam, under the tutelage of John Robinson, they were so fervent on trying to make sure that they could spread the gospel. They could spread the gospel that they actually started a printing press in a town called Leiden. And what they did was they print 15 books of their own, gospel books about the Bible, about ministry, and shipped those books all across England and Scotland. They smuggled them in kegs. And so, of course, that was a problem because King James was like, you know what, that's not good. So King James tracked them down for a year, found out that it was this place in Leiden, in Holland. He came in, sent the troops in there, kicked the door down, put them all in jail, took their Bibles and everything else, and that was the end of their printing factory in Holland. And Holland all of a sudden became a hotbed, and now they were stuck there. That didn't work out very well. So now, what did they do? Did they hide somewhere else? No. The Pilgrims went back to England, of all places, back into the lion's den to again try and do something crazy, and that would be escape. So here we have this is a picture of them leaving Holland After prayer and reflection, the church was still willing to leave for America, but not all could afford to go. And many in the church, such as the 30-year-old William Bradford, which is the guy right there in the center with the arrow to the left. The guy to the right is going to be John Robinson. He died shortly after this. But they decided that they're going to go, and they prayed for them to go. And the problem was that that Robinson himself couldn't go because they commissioned two ships. You probably heard of them. One was called the Mayflower, and one was called the Speedwell. With the Speedwell, when it took off, actually started to crack and leak, and they had to go back to shore and jettison that particular plan. But the Mayflower couldn't hold all the people, so they had to decide who's going to go, who would go and who wouldn't go. And John Robinson there on the right couldn't go, and so they said a farewell prayer. And this picture supposedly is supposed to be accurate to the details in terms of the people, how they looked, and also the costumes. Whoever painted this supposedly had gone through it in detail, and it looks similar to this in terms of at least the costumes, if nothing else. Okay, so let's go forward a little bit more, and let's talk about the actual crossing of the Mayflower into America. So when the Speedwell had to be brought back ashore, it was interesting because everything had gone wrong up to that point, and so they were going to have to be extra careful as they offloaded and went back onto the Mayflower to get back over to America because they were still fugitives. So here you have the Mayflower, which, by the way, is a brown water vessel. It's not designed at all to cross the Atlantic, especially not during hurricane season. It was not designed to have 102 passengers who are the Pilgrims and 30 crew members to go across such a long journey. It was a horrific journey, horrific voyage, because they had to stay underground because there was bad waves. The ship was actually bobbing and weaving at 45-degree angles in the water. It was causing massive seasickness. People were throwing up all over the place. There were no bathrooms. It was rancid. People were getting sick. It was a horrible experience. But yet they decided to do it, and it took them 66 days to make the voyage, when normally should have only taken like 30 days to make the voyage. So twice the distance, and they do all of that just to get over to the New World, landing in Plymouth Rock, which is what I have behind me, the picture you saw at the very beginning of the screen here, of the live stream. And so here's a quote from William Bradford. He says, "In several of these storms, the wind was so strong and the seas so high that they could not carry a knot of sail." So they were basically stuck in the water and they could do nothing. And so it was a miracle that this ship, this wine vessel, this ship only designed to go on the outskirts of a country in the brown water, not in the deep water, so that they could, do commerce. That was it. These people were, I would say, crazy, but they were all in again. And so that was that. And so the rest of the story. They land on Plymouth Rock, and at that point in time, things only got worse. Now, this picture here is of the first Thanksgiving, but before they got to this point, I would be remiss to say about what the relationship was for the Pilgrims in terms of the Native Americans or the Indians there. And one thing that people would say, and these people in the 1619 Project would say, is that, they came over to America, but then all they did was they just took the Indians and they took the land and they killed them and all of that. Well, that did happen, obviously. The conquistadors from Spain and many other groups came in who all they wanted to do was rape and pillage the land and do what they wanted to do. But these people were not God-fearing people. These were not the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims, remember, came over as families. They didn't come over as conquerors. They came over as people wanting to pray without being killed. They wanted to be able to have a church and fellowship without being put in jail. That was their motive. They wanted to have a special life for themselves and their families without the tyranny of what they called, well, what King James called the divine right of kings. No, they thought and they knew that the divine right is of the king, and that king would be Jesus Christ, not the King James in England. So the Pilgrims were not the other people. Now, what transpired with the Pilgrims and the Indians wasn't perfect. I mean, there were some problems, of course, but they were not conquerors. They were not enslaving Indians. None of that happened. In fact, William Bradford wrote in this journal, there's a case where the Pilgrims executed one of their own on the testimony of solely 2 Indians. That was it. And so that meant right there that they valued Native Americans as humans, so much so that based on their testimony alone, they executed one of their own. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this statue here, but not quite yet. I'm going to come back to this. Let me get a sip of tea here. Okay, so let me just talk to you a little bit about, real quickly, about the Pilgrims and what their first year was like. And I don't think many people understand this. I think this, when I say this, I think this will really nail some points home here. We heard the story about them being persecuted from King James, Queen Elizabeth in 1593. The law basically saying if you read the Bible in English, you could be in trouble. And then, of course, the separatists happened because they said, you know what, we can't stay here because we can't purify the church. King James said, oh, okay, you guys are going to be killed. We're going to hunt you down because, I'm the divine right to the king. And what you're saying to me is not what I'm saying. So they run the scurvy for 6 years. They have fellowship there. They get found out. They try to escape. It fails. They try to escape again. It fails. But this time it does fail, but they actually miraculously get sent up to Norway. And then the storm hits. They come back down to Amsterdam. And so they've been to all this stuff. They finally go back to England because they had a printing press in Holland that didn't work out because King James found them out. They print 15 books, smuggling them all over Scotland and England. And then they were persecuted there again. So they left Holland, go to England, say, you know what, let's get out of Dodge completely. We're going to America. This is too much. And so they had 2 boats, the Mayflower and the Speedwell. Speedwell didn't do well. So then they had to come back together. That cracked a leak. So then they had to split their party up. John Robinson, who was their pastor for 12 years, he couldn't stay. So then he basically had to stay aside, and he never saw them again. He died a few years later. And so now they're on the Mayflower. And by the way, I forgot this story here. Back on the Mayflower, you see this thing here, just the arrow right here? When they're in the middle of the ocean, it was, it's storming and coming down like crazy. This thing cracked, this vertical beam here cracked, and the ship was going down. They were done for. It was, nice try. It was, but just so happened, just through providence, the Pilgrims had a giant screw that they used to lift houses, to build homes when they got to the New World. Well, this screw just happened to be the perfect size and put in the perfect location at the right time in the right space and saved the ship, and the ship did not sink. How insane is that? So they go through all these different things. So finally, they're in here in America. And now what happens? Well, guess what? It's cold. It's dark. No one knows what to do. The men, the plan is this. Look, so the women and the men during the daytime are going to work together to try and build shelter as best they can. At night, the women go off to the ships. All right, so let me back up a little bit. So the Mayflower captain who dropped them off and said, okay, guys, peace out. We're good to go. But on second thought, maybe I should stick around because maybe you guys aren't going to make it. So the Mayflower captain and his crew of 30 stayed on the Mayflower about a mile offshore and waited just in case, just make sure they're okay. Well, so the plan was that the men and the women during the day would work to try to, get food and shelter, and the men would build shelters at that time so they could, live. But when nighttime came, it got colder, and the women and children went back on the boats, on boats back to the Mayflower at night, so they could, so they could be warm at least. And so the men worked tirelessly to do this, but eventually they began to get sick. Illness came in, and people were dying. Remember, there's 102 people on the Mayflower for the Pilgrims, and not including the crew of 30. 102. Halfway through the winter, 47 were dead, and many of them were women, and many of them were the men. And here's the thing: here's what people don't understand. At any given, it got so bad that at any point in time, there was only 6 or 7 people who were able-bodied enough to do any kind of work, and those 6 or 7 people had to take the dead bodies of their comrades up a hill and bury them in a mass grave. Why a mass grave and not individual graves? Well, it's because they didn't want the Indians to know that they were messing up, that they were as very strong. So they put them all in one grave. They didn't see headstones of 1, 2, 3, up to 50, and know that they were vulnerable to attack. So they dug a mass grave, put their bodies in there, and so they were so sick and tired and throwing up. And when one person got better, one person got sick, and no more than 6 or 7 could do this. And it got even worse than that. So the ship captain said, eventually he said, guys, when it got to a certain point, the ship captain said, look, guys, if you get on the boat now, we can be back in England in a couple of weeks, and 3 or 4 weeks. Get on the boat. They didn't do it. No person left to go back to England. They were all in, pot committed. Look, because God's speaking to us in his word, we trust him, and we're going to go with him. And if we die, we die, but this is where we're going to go. And so the ship captain leaves them behind. And then the mothers with their children no longer had a boat to go to at night. So what do? The kids are starving. The kids are cold. The mothers literally laid on their children in the snow, in the mud. And the kids survived. Most of the women died. Incredible. That was their first year. That was their first 6 months. And you tell me, you have the foundation of the greatest country to ever face this earth. You tell me that we weren't founded on Christian principles? I haven't even got to what Thomas Jefferson felt, even though people say, well, he's a deist. No, that the federal government, when its first act to do was to buy Bibles and put Bibles in all the homes in the colonies. They paid for that because they felt that even though a lot of them weren't devout, let's say evangelical Christians, most of them were, but many of them weren't. They said, that's the foundation that we want our country to be on. If people follow this word of God, we're going to have a prosperous nation. And so that was what the Pilgrims, I'm sure that none of us have heard that story. And so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to wrap this guy up here. I have a clip that I'm going to show you guys. It's from the film Monumental. And it's about, I'm not sure how long this clip is. Maybe it's about 6 minutes, 9 minutes, but it's really good. And it's about this particular statue here. If you know what it is, it's called the Monument of the Forefathers. It's in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And this is the legacy matrix of, it's basically a textbook on how to get back our country. Okay, it's a textbook. And this next clip here is going to tell you exactly what the symbolism is, what it means, and how we can get this country back on track. And this is what they were taught by John Robinson in Holland all those years. They were trained to build a country. They knew this. And so this is what they learned. And this is a physical representation of what they learned. And they gave it to us so that in case we ever were to lose sight of our country or our nation or our liberty or our foundation, this is how we get it back. Let me check any comments here we have. Okay, cool. Mystery. Hello, how are you guys doing? Hello, awesome. So here we go. So I'm gonna play this clip real quickly, and then we'll just wrap us up in about an hour, hopefully. And I'll come back into any questions, and I will probably react to it too. So I may stop in between because maybe some copyright stuff going on YouTube. So I may stop just to keep, whatever going, but I won't stop that much, I don't think. Let's go. Let's check this out here. This is from the movie Monumental with Kirk Cameron.
Tons of solid granite. It's the largest granite monument in America, and it's hidden on a hilltop overlooking Plymouth in a residential neighborhood.
I've never heard of this.
Hardly anybody in America knows about it, and yet the people of America put this together over a 70-year period, paid for by the Congress, paid for by the state legislature in Massachusetts, as a strategy laid out, we call it the Matrix of Liberty, that was given to us by the forefathers, by the Pilgrims. And those 130 years ago, when they built this, wanted to leave this behind for us, so that if we would ever forget how liberty is built, we would know what to do to regain it.
This is how they did it.
All right, so before we get into this real quickly, I want to say real quickly, you can actually buy this statue, and I'll leave a link in the description below. I'm going to buy it myself, and I'll have that hopefully in a few weeks, and I'll let you guys, well, you won't see it virtually, but you'll see me have it.
This is how they did it. Now, if somebody else wants to try another way, which is what's happening today in America, we're trying 1,000 ways to turn America around, but this is the way it was done. This is it. The only successful strategy of liberty that has ever been carried out in the history of mankind. Well, let's walk through it. And let's take this strategy apart. What does this mean? What are they trying to tell us here?
So where do you start?
Her name is Faith. It says so right there. And she is pointing her finger to heaven. Why?
For God is.
Where God is, because her faith is in the God of the Bible, in Jesus Christ. They knew that the only faith that could bring true liberty was a faith in the one true God and his Bible. And you see a Bible there, an open Bible. It's a Geneva Bible. The pages are opened up, which meant that they read it. And as they read it, and as they had faith in God, he gave them wisdom. That's why you see the star on her forehead.
The Geneva Bible was the first Bible that actually had chapter and verse like we have now. Like, so the first time you could see what John 3:16 was in the Geneva Bible.
She's given wisdom to know how to live in this world. And all of the rest of these statues, each one weighing almost 20 tons, is tied to faith, because without faith, it falls apart. And that's the beginning of it all.
Where do we go from there?
From here, you need to go to character or morality, and you'll notice...
Because that's the internal liberty.
That is the internal liberty, which is the beginning of all freedom. She is called morality. Notice that she has no eyes. That is on purpose, because she's looking internal character, the transformation of the heart first, and then that brings external transformation. And notice that she has the 10 Commandments in her left hand and the scroll of Revelation in the right. What would that signify?
The Bible.
Exactly. That if you want to have morality, there has to be a standard, and more than that, there has to be an internal transformation. This is speaking of the need to internalize and allow God to change our hearts and our minds first.
Because in England, you had top-down morality imposed on people. Do this, do that. You're moralizing people, but you're saying their morality started in the heart.
In the heart. It had to be changed here. They realized
inside.
Just because you said you were a member of a church, like the Church of England, didn't make you a Christian. And you see this over on the side. The side statues give an explanation of what the meaning of this is for us. That's why we need the evangelist. You see the evangel here writing down the Gospels. And there's a need for evangelists. Why? Because we need to have the gospel of the great liberating gospel of Christ that says he came to set us free first.
So this is...
What's interesting is that you have to have faith first. That's number one. And the faith is pointing to God, and the star means wisdom on her forehead. And so, you know, that's the biggest statue, and all of that centers around that. And so once you have faith, this must be done in order. Without faith, nothing else works. Once you have faith, then you have what they call morality. And that morality is internal, like the person she couldn't see. So we're looking inward for ourselves, not from a top-down government, like a government to tell us what to do. And what they were seeing in England, with King James and Queen Elizabeth, but from a moral fabric of the Bible. They were holding the Bible in their hands. So that's where the morality comes from. And the faith is what's given, pointing to the one true God.
Completely contrary to the way the rest of the world had done it up to this point. The Pilgrims are saying that morality starts internally with the gospel. The evangelist has to preach the message that transforms the heart, and then you want to do what's right, rather than being forced to do what's right from the king who tells you what good and bad is.
That's it.
Okay, what's next?
What's next is, and you see the development of it, if you want to have a free civilization, you need to have a civil authority or civil law that will give a base for that freedom. In other words, you've got to have some degree of order in society. And that order, as you see here, is built upon law. The principles of God's law then are related into the civil law. And that's what we see here in his left hand. We also see his hand, his right hand is extended in mercy. Mercy toward those that he's dealing justice with. Why? Because this form of law has a degree of equity in it. And you see this in the side statutes where
Can we go see?
Yeah. Justice. She's holding the scales of justice with justice and equity, which means that, you know, when a crime is committed, it should be cared for in terms of its punishment, the same for the rich and for the poor and for everyone else. There should be equality under the law.
It's funny how the left doesn't want to talk. They want to talk about equity, but they never want to talk about equity in the way the framers talked about it, in terms of no matter how big or small you are, you're still subject to the law, Hunter Biden. And I mean, come on. I mean, this right here, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, you can take the same, we have gone so far away from where they are now that we are basically like in the era where King James was back in England for us. I mean, it's getting that bad. It's getting to be that bad. It really is.
On the other side, we notice that this form of law is different than the laws of so many nations that are built on tyrants, that are built on, if the Aztecs wanted to cut your heart out, they just cut your heart out. Here, mercy. Mercy built upon the base that he offers us, mercy and grace, along with law. And in this form of law, there is that tremendous mercy.
So you have to start with faith. Faith in the true God, that produces the internal morality of the heart. You have a standard by which to judge what good and bad is, and then you create a moral system of law to have a basis for a free and just society that can mete out justice when crimes are committed, but also extend mercy to people and show them grace.
And then that gives you the freedom. Once you have a society that's built like this, now you have a civility in society. Now you can educate your children. Here.
So that makes sense. Let me just recap it again. So faith is what you need to have first. And then once you have faith, you have morality. Morality comes from internally. Once you have that internal morality, then you can build laws that keep you safe, but the laws have to be fair. They have to be in equity. But they also have to have mercy and justice together. So we're not savages, right? And once you have that, once you have a safe environment with morality hinged on faith, all of a sudden now you can educate your children. Safe schools, right? If you want schools that are safe, you have to have. If you want to educate your kids, you have to have schools that are safe. And it's the same principle. It's common sense. These guys really lay out here very, very well.
They could train them, and you see the lady here in the statue of education, and she is opening the Word of God or the Book of Knowledge, and she has got the wreath of victory she's wearing, about a 25-year-old woman. She is educating her children, and she is sitting in victory. Why is she sitting in victory? Because she has trained her children up in the way they should go and prepared them so that the next generation that came after them would know the strategy of how to carry on the truth and carry on a free civilization. Isn't that amazing?
And what's on her side over here?
Over here, you see her training her child, and she has a book in her one hand, and then he has a scroll where he is writing on the other. And this is youth, trained in their youth. It was the parents' responsibility to educate. And so this would be the mother training up a child in the way he should go.
You know what I think is interesting is that they had just left England and left this top-down government system. So when they got here, their idea of education wasn't send your kids off to a government school to educate them. It was the parents' responsibility to do this, particularly because their worldview was different than the government's worldview, which would have been, no, you're a nobody, you're a slave, you just lay down on your back and do whatever the king says, which is sort of the attitude that we get in most governments today, is that you just do whatever the government says. Whereas they're saying, no, it's our responsibility as parents to educate our kids and to teach them faith and internal morality and to understand the importance of fair, just, and merciful laws.
And it's passed down from generation to generation. And if you see on the other side, you'll see how the grandfathers played a role. For it's not just the father. Of course, the father and the mother are the key educators. But the key is the hoary heads. Those are the older ones who also have a role. Because you see the guy with the beard here, he's the old guy. And what do you see his left hand pointing to?
There's a book, and it looks like you've got the 10 Commandments again.
10 Commandments and an open Bible, okay? And so he, being older and wiser, he knows the commandments, he knows the Word of God, and then he is pointing to that, and then on the other side, what do you see of him?
That's the world.
The world, right. So he is teaching the younger generation, both his daughter and his grandchildren, how the world works from a biblical perspective. And all of this leads to something, Kirk, and that's, you see the strategy building from the internal to the external.
I think one thing we're failing to do in our society is have reverence for our elderly, for our older people who've been through what we're going into. And I think this statute and this plan for bringing back this country to where it needs to be includes everybody. Includes the father, the mother, the patriarchy, the older generation, the grandparents, and based on what we talked about before, with a structure based on faith, morality, law, and education. And the last one's coming up next.
The law, to education, to pass it on to the next generation. And what are they passing on? They're passing on liberty. And this is what is the result of living out that strategy. In his name is liberty. We call him Liberty Man.
Look at this guy, he's a
Liberty
stud.
hero. Now this guy is not a guy you want to mess with, right? And he's seated in liberty.
Okay, explain who this guy is. Liberty Man.
Liberty Man, or the liberty hero that he represents, is the fruit. He is the result of obeying the matrix of liberty that you see on this monument. And he is seated in liberty. Now, I want you to be careful to notice these details. Notice that he's holding broken chains in his left hand. Notice that he has, where the chains were, bound to his legs. Notice that he is now seated in liberty. He's got that good look on his face like, listen, I'm free, but I'm looking out, defending my liberty, but I'm free. And notice the claw that is on his right shoulder. That claw relates to a skin that goes around to the left here, and you see a lion's head, an entire lion skin. That ultimately represented the lion of the English tyrant back in those days.
So he has slain the lion.
He's slain the lion, and that's what it says here on the left. Tyranny is defeated, and you see Liberty Man standing over tyranny with his foot on the chest of tyranny. He's holding tyranny down. And again, the Pilgrims won this victory without violence of any kind, except living out God's principles.
You know, one of the things that's striking me is the fact that this is talking about our forefathers, the Pilgrims, but this guy is not some wimpish little religious guy. I mean, this guy is a stud, right?
Yeah.
He's strong. He's looking out. He has just defeated a beast, and he's got a sword in his hand.
That's right.
And he's here to protect, right?
That's right.
He's here to protect his family and to defend the laws that they have made, and ultimately to defend their values and their character, their faith.
Exactly, exactly. And it shows you that if you do it right, you can be strong as an individual, you can defend liberty, and if need be, you can fight. You don't want to fight, but if you have to, you're ready. But the point is, because you've done it God's way, there is a long-term blessing that goes with it.
This is awesome.
This is it.
I know that was pretty long, but I thought that was pretty good. I thought it was a good way to finish this live stream. I figured, to me, there's really no way to really talk about the Pilgrims without bringing that last part up. And I think going forward, I'm always going to pretty much bring up that monument of the forefathers. In fact, there's actually a guidebook here that you can actually purchase that tells you all about that. It's let me pull it up right here for you guys to take a look at it. I have it in one of my slides here. So here's a guidebook that you can get for yourselves, and it's overlooking Plymouth, and again, just incredible. You have, again, just to recap here, you have the woman on top is Faith. She got her finger up in the air, looking at, pointing at the one true God. She has a star in her head symbolizing wisdom, and she has a Geneva Bible in her hand. It's opened up. And from there, you go from there, you come down to morality. The woman, you remember her, she had her eyes were closed because symbolizing how you had to have internal morality that comes from within, comes from God, comes from that faith. It doesn't come from a king or a queen or a president. It comes from, or government, it comes from God. And then from there, you have laws that get made because you have to have a civil society. The civil society, those laws need to be just. They need to be equity in terms of no matter who you are susceptible under the law, regardless of who you are in stature. But the laws can't be harsh. They have to be merciful. And that's another part of it too. We're not savages. We're not like the Aztecs, just doing stuff that's willy-nilly just to hurt people. It's just, it's fair, it's equitable, and it's merciful. And once you have a safe society, safe civil society, now you have the ability to now educate your children. Your grandparents help out. They give the worldview between, the Ten Commandments in the Bible and giving a worldview because they have the experience from there. You have the mother training a child up with the way he or she should go. And you have those principles are there because we can't have the government telling us. We have to have that come from the parents themselves. And then once you have all that set up, the faith, the morality, the laws, education, the result of that is liberty. And we saw Liberty Man, who basically was a guy who was looking outward, ready to fight, doesn't want to fight, but can fight. But he just slayed the lion or the tyranny of England, which was that lion symbolized. And you saw that him on the other side statue with him with his foot on the neck of tyranny. I mean, how can you not love that? So anyway, so that is what I had for this particular live stream. It was a last minute deal. I was prepared to do this because I've been doing this for several weeks now. I've every week I do a biblical citizenship commentary on my locals channel, which is you can sign up for that if you like. That would be I'll leave a link in below. And I also do on YouTube if you're a member there, paid member there. Every week I do a commentary on that of about 30 minutes to 40 minutes talking about this kind of stuff. And I'm basically going through a biblical citizenship class that I've been taking, and I'm going to redo probably in about 3 weeks now. And what I'll do there is I'll actually go into this particular book. I will comment on it. I will go through the workbook, and we will actually go through the lesson plan and explain it and talk about it. And that's presented to all people who are paid members on here YouTube or on locals. And again, link in the description for that. So with that, guys, there's no comments out here. It's late for most of you guys on the East Coast. So that everybody, I appreciate you hanging out with me for a little bit. And for those of you who are seeing this after the fact, hopefully this will be good. I mean, hopefully this will be something that you learned a lot, and spread the word here, because I think people need to understand this. And lastly, I'll say this: if you want to take a class on this, you can do it right now. There's classes going on all the time. Go to patriotacademy.com, and you can sign up for a biblical citizenship class, a class on the Constitution. They have a long version and a short version, and other things too, campfire revivals and other things, live streams available, and it's all for free. But if you want to stick around, for me, I'm going to do one in about 3 or 4 weeks from now, like all over again, and we can do it there as well. All right. So that, guys, I hope you have a great night and great evening. Have a happy weekend, and I'll see you guys in the next video.